He's always calling me Little Marco. And I'll admit, the guy, he's taller than me, he's like 6'2", which is why I don't understand why his hands are the size of someone who's 5'2". Have you seen his hands? They're like this. And you know what they say about men with small hands?
When it comes to the leaders of the United States, everything from their policies to their personalities has been analyzed and debated. But one curious statistic has always fascinated historians and trivia lovers alike: the height of each American president. The tallest commanders-in-chief.
He said I had small hands. Actually, I'm 6'3", not 6'2", but he said I had small hands. They're not small, are they? I never heard that one before. I've always had people say, Donald, you have the most beautiful hands. Right?
At the top of the presidential height chart stands Abraham Lincoln, who measured an impressive 6 feet 4 inches. His height, combined with his lean frame and distinct presence, gave him an unmistakable silhouette in any room. Lincoln's towering figure contributed to his image as a larger-than-life leader, particularly during the nation's darkest period, the Civil War. Many contemporaries described him as both awkward and majestic, his physical appearance matching the moral gravity of his presidency. In portraits and sculptures, Lincoln's height was often exaggerated even further, reinforcing his reputation as a giant among men, both literally and symbolically. Close behind him was Lyndon B. Johnson at 6 feet 3.5 inches, whose size complemented his famously dominating personality. Johnson's treatment, as journalists called it, involved leaning in close, using his frame and voice to command attention and push legislation through Congress. His height wasn't just a statistic, it became a political instrument, one that enhanced his already forceful presence. Thomas Jefferson, Bill Clinton, and Donald Trump each followed closely, all standing around 6 feet 2 inches, proving further how frequently tall candidates have reached the Oval Office. George Washington, the nation's first president, was notably tall for his era at 6 feet 1.5 inches, towering over most men of the 18th century. His stature helped project strength and authority during the fragile early years of the Republic. Likewise, modern leaders like Barack Obama, who also measured 6 feet 1.5, carried themselves with a cool confidence that matched their height. Height and charisma often combined to create an image of stability, a quality Americans seem to favor. Interestingly, even among taller presidents, the range of body types and postures has varied widely. Ronald Reagan, who stood at 6 feet 1 inch, had a more compact athletic frame shaped by his early years as a lifeguard and actor. His upright posture and camera-ready presence made him appear commanding without ever seeming overbearing. By contrast, Donald Trump's height and broad build project a showman's kind of authority, one less presidential in the traditional sense, but undeniably visible and larger than life in every photo opportunity. The shortest presidents and the underdog legacy.
He was the smallest man ever to occupy the executive mansion. I think he was 5 feet 4 and never weighed 100 pounds, dripping wet.
At the opposite end of the spectrum was James Madison, who stood just 5 feet 4 inches tall. Despite his small stature, Madison's intellect and political strategy were monumental. Known as the father of the Constitution, he demonstrated that influence and leadership were not bound by physical size. During his presidency, Madison led the nation through the War of 1812, facing challenges that would have tested even the most imposing figures. Though he lacked physical height, his intellectual reach extended across generations of political thought. Following closely behind Madison in the lower ranks of the height chart were Martin Van Buren and Benjamin Harrison, both standing at 5 feet 6 inches. Van Buren's height made him one of the shortest leaders in American history, but he compensated through shrewd political organization and strategic alliances. Harrison, meanwhile, had the misfortune of following the much taller and more robust Grover Cleveland, a comparison that likely didn't work in his favor during the 1892 election, which Cleveland went on to win. Height differences in that era may have influenced public perception even more than today, given the limited reach of mass media and photography. William McKinley and John Adams both measured 5 feet 7 inches, and like their shorter peers, each left a complicated but significant mark on their presidency. Adams, one of the founding fathers, was respected for his intellect and stubborn integrity, but was often described as combative and humorless, a temperament that perhaps wasn't helped by his relatively diminutive frame when compared to taller, more physically imposing figures like Washington or Jefferson. McKinley, on the other hand, projected warmth and steady resolve, compensating for his lack of height with charisma and political discipline. As height increases up the chart, patterns emerge. Presidents under 5 feet 9 inches were often perceived as intellectual or administrative rather than charismatic. John Quincy Adams, standing at 5 feet 7.5 inches, was a brilliant diplomat and strategist, but struggled to connect with voters in the way more dynamic or taller presidents did. In contrast, Franklin Pierce and Theodore Roosevelt, both at 5 feet 10 inches, embodied a more vigorous image of leadership, showing how even a few inches could alter public perception. It's worth noting that for much of American history, average male height has increased, meaning presidents who were considered tall in their time might not be seen that way today. In Madison's era, for example, the average American man stood about 5 feet 7 inches, so his 5 feet 4 inches was less of an outlier than it might seem. The gradual rise of height parallels advances in nutrition and health, but it also mirrors how ideals of leadership have evolved from scholarly authority towards physical presence and charisma. Height and election outcomes.
There's an interesting correlation between the person who is picked to be the President of the United States and their height. Perhaps you know this. Over the last 100 years, especially from 1916 to 2018, the person who won the presidential election was at least, or an average of, about half an inch taller than anyone that they were running against.
The fascination with presidential height doesn't end with trivia, it extends to the psychology of elections. Over the years, folk wisdom has claimed taller candidates almost always win, an idea reinforced by the era of television debates. The first televised debate in 1960 between John F. Kennedy and Richard Nixon is often cited as a turning point where visual perception became as important as verbal skill. Kennedy's 6'1" frame and composed demeanor contrasted sharply with Nixon's shorter height and visibly anxious appearance, leading many to believe Kennedy's height and confidence gave him the edge. In 31 of the last 40 elections, the taller candidate won either the popular vote or the presidency itself. From Abraham Lincoln's victory over the shorter Stephen Douglas to Ronald Reagan's success against the more modestly built Jimmy Carter, height has appeared again and again as a subtle advantage. Even in modern contests, this pattern can be observed. In 2008, Barack Obama, standing at 6 feet 1.5, towered over John McCain, who was just 5 feet 9, while in 1988, George H.W. Bush, at 6'2", easily outmeasured Michael Dukakis at 5 feet 8.5. However, there are notable exceptions that prove the rule isn't absolute. In 1976, Jimmy Carter, at 5 feet 9.5, defeated the 6-foot-tall Gerald Ford. Similarly, Richard Nixon won against the taller George McGovern in 1972 and against Hubert Humphrey in 1968, despite being slightly shorter. These cases suggest that while height may influence perception, it doesn't guarantee victory. Charisma, communication, and context remain more powerful forces in the end. Scholars have tried to quantify this phenomenon. A 2001 study examined height as a factor in popular vote totals, finding that taller candidates often earned a measurable but not decisive advantage. A later 2013 study added that while taller candidates were more likely to win the popular vote, the relationship wasn't statistically strong enough to predict outcomes with certainty. The rise of television and digital media has only magnified the effect. In an image-driven culture, physical presentation often conveys leadership before words are even spoken. Height, posture, and presence create an immediate impression that can sway undecided voters, consciously or not. The optics of stature remain part of campaign strategy even today, influencing how candidates stand on debate stages or appear in photo ops besides opponents. During the 19th century, as mass photography emerged, presidential candidates began to recognize the visual power of stature. Abraham Lincoln's portraits often emphasized his towering frame and long limbs, but they also softened his appearance through careful posing. In contrast, shorter presidents like James K. Polk and Zachary Taylor relied on stern expressions and strong postures to project seriousness. They understood that while they couldn't appear taller, they could still appear resolute. By the 20th century, the growing importance of television changed everything. Presidents like Ronald Reagan and Bill Clinton exemplified a new awareness. Reagan's 6'1" frame, paired with a relaxed smile and confident stride, photographed beautifully. Clinton's 6'2" stature and casual ease on stage made him approachable yet authoritative. Today, as candidates are dissected on social media and 24-hour news cycles, even small differences in height can be amplified or debated. Donald Trump's reported 6'3" listing became a subject of mockery and speculation, with skeptics comparing photos to conclude he was slightly shorter. Now it's time to hear from you. Do you think height plays a role in how Americans perceive leadership? Let us know in the comment section below.